Everyone thought the emergency board meeting had been called to save Marcus Whitmore. In truth, it had been called to remove him. For months, Whitmore Industries had been bleeding money behind polished press releases and expensive charity appearances. Marcus had blamed market conditions, foreign competition, disloyal employees, anything except himself. He cut departments, ignored warnings, insulted partners, and treated the company like a family heirloom that could never be taken away. But debt does not respect family names. Neither do acquisition contracts. By the time the directors gathered that morning, the deal was almost complete. A mysterious buyer had agreed to purchase a controlling stake, settle the company's urgent liabilities, and protect thousands of employees from Marcus's reckless leadership. Only a few people knew the buyer's identity. Marcus was not one of them. That was why he entered the boardroom smiling. He believed the meeting was about securing more funding. He believed the board still needed his approval. He believed his mother's applause could still turn humiliation into victory. Then he saw a woman sitting quietly beside the chairman. She wore no obvious diamonds, no loud designer logo, no expression that invited conversation. Her posture was composed, her attention sharp, her silence almost unsettling. Marcus had no idea she was Adrienne Vale, one of the most formidable CEOs in the country, known for acquiring broken companies and removing the people who broke them. To Marcus, she was simply an unfamiliar woman in his room. And Marcus did what arrogant men often do when they feel watched. He tried to make her smaller. "Did we start allowing spectators into board meetings?" he asked. The room tightened. No one answered. His mother chuckled from her seat, encouraging him. Marcus smiled wider and told Adrienne that whatever department she belonged to, she should wait outside until real decisions were finished. The insult hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Adrienne did not defend herself. She had learned long ago that insecure people reveal more when uninterrupted. Then Marcus made the announcement that turned discomfort into scandal. He told the board he was making necessary changes in his personal life before leading the company into its next era. His fiancée, Natalie, looked up in confusion. Before she could speak, Marcus reached behind him and brought forward Celeste, the woman everyone had heard rumors about but no one had dared mention. He introduced Celeste as his future wife. Natalie sat motionless. The directors stared at the table. Marcus's mother applauded proudly, as though her son had just made a brilliant merger, instead of publicly betraying the woman he had promised to marry. That was the moment Adrienne made her decision. Until then, she had intended to remove Marcus quietly, offer his mother a dignified exit from the advisory board, and preserve the Whitmore name for the sake of employees and shareholders. But dignity, she realized, could not be granted to people who mistook cruelty for power. She stood. The applause stopped instantly. Marcus turned, irritated. "I thought I told you to wait outside." Adrienne looked at him with calm precision. "You are no longer in a position to tell me anything." A stunned silence fell over the room. The chairman pushed the signed documents forward. Adrienne continued, "As of this morning, my company owns controlling interest in Whitmore Industries. Your employment, your authority, and your family's privileges are now subject to review." Marcus went pale. His mother whispered his name. Celeste's smile disappeared. And Adrienne had not yet revealed the final clause, the one that would make them beg. For 3 seconds, no one moved. It was the kind of silence that did not simply fill a room. It pressed against the glass walls, settled over the polished table, and seemed to pull every hidden thought into the open. The city glittered beyond the windows, indifferent and bright, while inside the boardroom, the Whitmore dynasty began to understand that power had changed hands without asking permission. Marcus stared at Adrienne as though her face might rearrange itself into someone less dangerous. "This is absurd," he said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. Whitmore Industries is not some corner store you can walk in and purchase. Adrian glanced toward the chairman, Robert Hargrove, a tired man with silver hair and the heavy expression of someone who had spent months negotiating with creditors by day and swallowing antacids by night. "Mr. Hargrove," Adrian said, "please summarize the board resolution." Hargrove adjusted his glasses. His hands trembled slightly, but when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of formality. Following an emergency vote conducted last night at 9:42 p.m., the board approved the sale of a controlling 57% interest in Whitmore Industries to Vale Capital Group. The transaction became effective upon the transfer of funds at 8:03 this morning. Marcus took one step back. His mother, Victoria Whitmore, rose halfway from her chair. The pearls at her throat moved with the quick flutter of her breathing. "You had no right," she said. The company's general counsel, Miriam Ellis, opened a second folder. "Mrs. Whitmore, the board had every right under the emergency liquidity provisions enacted after the company defaulted on 2 credit facilities last quarter." Victoria's face hardened. Those provisions were temporary. "They were binding," Miriam replied. Marcus laughed once, but it came out cracked. "This is a stunt, some theatrical intimidation tactic. My family built this company." Adrian looked at him. "Your family inherited it. Thousands of employees built it." That landed harder than a shout. Natalie, still sitting near the far end of the table, raised her eyes. Her face remained composed, but her fingers were locked tightly together in her lap. Only Adrian noticed the indentation of an engagement ring that was no longer a promise, but a bruise made of diamonds. Celeste shifted closer to Marcus, as though proximity might protect her from the collapse happening around them. She had entered the room wearing a white dress, a gold bracelet, and the triumphant smile of a woman who believed she had been chosen by a prince. Now she was beginning to realize the castle had been sold before she arrived. Marcus pointed at Adrian. "You think buying shares makes you untouchable?" "No," Adrian said. "I think reading contracts does." Behind her calm voice, an old memory stirred. She was 17 again, standing beside her father in the rain outside a different building, smaller than this tower but no less cold. Her father, Daniel Vale, had worn his best suit that day, though the cuffs were frayed and his shoes were patched. He owned a modest precision parts workshop that had supplied Whitmore Industries for 12 years. 12 years of overnight orders, discounted invoices, emergency shipments, handshake promises. Then Whitmore delayed payment for 8 months. Then they cancelled the supplier agreement. Then they claimed the parts were defective. Adrian remembered the conference room where Victoria Whitmore, younger then, but no warmer, told her father that small vendors should know better than to depend on giants. Marcus had been there too, a college boy leaning against the wall, bored and amused. He had looked at Adrian's cheap blazer and whispered to another young executive, someone's daughter dressed up for court. Her father heard it. He said nothing. Outside, in the rain, he had placed one hand on Adrian's shoulder and said, "Remember this, Addie. Some people only recognize humanity when it comes with a price tag." That night, her mother cried over bills at the kitchen table. 3 months later, the workshop closed. Years later, Adrian would build Vale Capital Group with the same precision her father had once put into machine parts. She bought broken companies and studied their fractures. She knew the sound of rot beneath expensive language. She knew how pride appeared in balance sheets before it appeared in bankruptcy filings. And she knew Whitmore Industries had been rotting for years. But she had not come to the boardroom for revenge. Not entirely. The first warning had come in a spreadsheet. One of her analysts noticed a pattern of vendor payments routed through shell consultancies. Another found invoices from a luxury events firm disguised as operational expenses. A third flagged unusually generous contracts awarded to companies connected to Celeste's relatives. Then, tucked deep inside a file marked Legacy Advisory Disbursements, Adrian found monthly payments to Victoria Whitmore for brand stewardship. Brand stewardship. Two words that cost the company more than the annual salaries of 87 warehouse workers Marcus had laid off that spring. Adrian had looked at the number for a long time. Then she asked for every file. The deeper Vale Capital's team dug, the clearer the picture became. Whitmore Industries was not merely mismanaged. It was being drained by the very family claiming to protect it. Every public speech about sacrifice had been paid for by employees who lost health benefits, suppliers who waited months for checks, and pensioners whose retirement funds Marcus had treated like decorative promises. That was why Adrian included the final clause. She had hoped not to use it. Now, watching Marcus humiliate Natalie, watching Victoria clap for betrayal, Adrian knew restraint would only reward them. Marcus leaned over the table and snatched up one of the documents. "Where is my voting consent?" "You no longer held enough clean voting power to block the sale," Miriam said. "Clean," Marcus repeated. Adrian opened the black folder in front of her. For the first time, Marcus looked truly afraid. The folder was thin, that made it worse. Thick files suggested confusion, thin ones suggested certainty. "In the acquisition agreement," Adrian said, "there is a conduct-triggered enforcement clause. It applies to executive misrepresentation, undisclosed self-dealing, asset diversion, harassment claims concealed during due diligence, and any action that materially damages corporate reputation before transition." Victoria's mouth tightened. "You can't enforce that against us." Adrian turned one page. "Against you, Marcus Whitmore, Victoria Whitmore, and any beneficiary of improperly transferred corporate funds." Her gaze moved briefly to Celeste, including third-party recipients. Celeste's hand slipped from Marcus's arm. Marcus noticed, his jaw flexed. "This is insane," he snapped. "Celeste has nothing to do with corporate funds." Adrian slid a document across the table. It stopped in front of him with quiet finality. Her apartment was paid through Whitmore's executive relocation account. Her brother's consulting firm received $380,000 for a logistics strategy no one can locate. Her mother's charity received a corporate donation 2 days after Celeste signed an image rights agreement connected to your rebranding campaign. Celeste's face went pale beneath her makeup. Victoria slowly sat down. Natalie closed her eyes, not from weakness, but from recognition. Pieces were falling into place for her too. The cancelled trip Marcus had blamed on board pressure, the late-night calls, the sudden interest in charity galas Celeste attended, the way Victoria had begun correcting Natalie in public, reminding her that Whitmore wives needed to be adaptable. Natalie had thought she was being slowly pushed aside. She had not realized she was being financially replaced. Marcus slammed his palm against the table. "Enough." The sound cracked through the room. Adrian did not flinch. That bothered him more than fear would have. "You walk in here with your little folder and your rehearsed lines," he said, "and you think you can intimidate me in my own company." Adrian's eyes moved to the wall behind him. A portrait of Conrad Whitmore, the founder, looked down with painted severity. Beneath it was the family motto, engraved in brass, "We preserve what is ours." Adrian had noticed the motto when she entered. She had also noticed the small crack running through the brass plaque, right between the words, "what" and "is," as though the wall itself had grown tired of the lie. "No," she said, "I am correcting you in mine." Hargrove exhaled. One of the directors, a former bank executive named Elaine Porter, lowered her gaze to hide the smallest hint of satisfaction. 2 months earlier, Marcus had called her overcautious for asking why vendor lawsuits were missing from the risk summary. Last week, Victoria had suggested Elaine retire before she became one of those women who mistake anxiety for wisdom. Elaine had voted yes on the sale at 9:42 p.m. She had signed first. Marcus looked around the table, finally understanding that no one was rising to defend him. "Robert," he said to Hargrove, voice low with warning, "you will regret this." Hargrove's expression changed. For years, he had endured Marcus's tantrums because he believed preserving the company meant tolerating the heir. That morning, something in him had shifted. Perhaps it was the layoffs. Perhaps it was the pension letter he had signed with shame. Or perhaps it was the way Natalie sat silent while everyone waited for permission to show basic decency. "No," Hargrove said, "I regret waiting this long." The words struck the room with unexpected force. Victoria turned on him. "You ungrateful little clerk." Hargrove's face flushed, but he did not look away. "Your husband hired me 31 years ago because he said I understood numbers better than anyone in the room. You have called me a clerk for 29 of those years. I suppose we both know which title proved more useful today." A murmur passed among the directors. Adrian almost smiled. "Almost." Marcus moved suddenly toward the door. "I'm calling security." The security contract was updated at 8:15, Adrian said. He stopped. "The building access system too," she added. "Your executive credentials remain active for now, but any attempt to remove files, devices, or company property will trigger immediate lockdown." His hand hovered inches from the door handle. He turned slowly. For the first time, Marcus Whitmore looked less like an heir, and more like a man trapped inside a room he had always believed belonged to him. Victoria whispered, "Marcus, sit down." He hated that she sounded worried. The first flash of his childhood came without warning, Victoria standing over him in the East dining room after he lost a school debate at 14. His father, Edmund, had said losing gracefully was a skill. Victoria had snapped that grace was for people who expected second place. Later, when the house was quiet, she told Marcus that apology was a language servants taught their children so they could survive disappointment. "You are a Whitmore," she had said. "You do not ask, you do not explain, you make people adjust." He had believed her. He had built his entire life around that sentence. Now the room was refusing to adjust. Adrian pressed a small remote. The glass wall at the far side of the boardroom shifted from transparent to opaque. A screen descended from the ceiling. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Providing context." The screen displayed a timeline. At the top, WHITMOREINDUSTRIES, Executive Conduct Review. The directors already had copies, Marcus did not. Adrian had insisted on that. Not because she wanted drama, though Marcus would have accused her of it. She wanted sequence. People who abused power often survived by scattering facts until each one appeared isolated. A payment here, a lie there, a dismissal, a favor, an insult, a threat, but put them in order and the story revealed itself. January, delayed vendor payments, while executive bonuses were advanced. February, internal safety complaints, ignored at the Ohio plant. March, layoffs announced 3 days before the Whitmore family hosted a private gala billed to corporate outreach. April, pension stabilization, funds temporarily redirected. May, consulting agreements issued to companies linked to personal acquaintances. June, non-disclosure settlements prepared for 3 former employees who had raised concerns about Marcus's conduct. Natalie stared at the screen, her expression tightening. One of the names was familiar. Sophia Bell. Natalie remembered Sophia. She had been an assistant in Marcus's office, efficient and quiet. One day she was there, the next she was gone. Marcus had said she accepted a better opportunity abroad. Victoria had said some young women were too emotional for proximity to power. Natalie had believed none of it. The screen changed. A scanned email appeared. Marcus read the first line and lost color. Adrian did not read it aloud. She allowed the room to read in silence. It was worse that way. The email showed Marcus instructing finance to classify personal expenses as market development. Below it, another message showed a senior accountant objecting. Below that, a forwarded note from Marcus to Victoria, "Handle this before she becomes righteous." The accountant had been terminated 8 days later. Victoria gripped the arms of her chair. "That is privileged correspondence," she said. Miriam, the general counsel, looked at her coldly, "Not when it concerns concealment of corporate misconduct." Adrian clicked again. The next slide showed a photograph from a charity gala. Marcus stood beside Celeste, his hand resting possessively at her waist. Natalie was visible in the background, speaking with donors. The photo itself proved little, but beside it were invoices, travel records, apartment payments, vendor contracts. Celeste whispered, "Marcus, you said this was handled." That was the wrong thing to say. Every head turned toward her. Marcus looked at her with fury, but the damage was done. The mistress, who had smiled like a queen moments earlier, had accidentally confirmed there had been something to handle. Adrian observed her carefully. Celeste was not innocent, but she was not the architect. She was ambitious, reckless, and vain enough to believe being chosen by Marcus meant being protected by him. Adrian had met many versions of her in executive scandals. People who mistook borrowed power for ownership often learned too late that borrowed power collected interest. "Ms. Laurent," Adrian said, "you will be contacted by counsel regarding funds received through improper channels." Celeste swallowed. "Am I being accused of something?" "You are being informed of exposure." The difference chilled her. Marcus stepped in front of Celeste as if suddenly noble. "Leave her out of this." Natalie gave a small, disbelieving laugh. It was the first sound she had made since the announcement. Marcus looked toward her, irritated. "Natalie, don't start." She stood. Every person in the room seemed to remember at once that she was there not as furniture, not as collateral damage, but as a person who had just been publicly humiliated in front of the board of the company she had spent 2 years helping rehabilitate. Natalie came from a family that did not own towers. Her father taught chemistry at a public high school. Her mother ran the front desk at a medical clinic. Natalie had entered the Whitmore world with intelligence, restraint, and a belief that love could exist even where money made people careless. She had handled donor relationships Marcus forgot, smoothed over investor dinners he nearly ruined, and persuaded suppliers not to abandon the company after his insults. She had told herself that Marcus was complicated, pressured, raised badly but capable of becoming better. That morning, when Celeste walked in, Natalie finally understood that she had not been loving potential. She had been negotiating with emptiness. "Don't start," Natalie repeated quietly. Marcus's eyes flickered. "This is not the time." "No," she said, "it seems this is exactly the time." Victoria leaned forward. "Natalie, compose yourself." Natalie turned to her. "I have been composed for 2 years. You mistook it for permission." The words landed like a slap, though Natalie never raised her voice. Adrian watched her with something close to respect. There were moments when a person's life split cleanly into before and after. Most people imagined those moments came with screaming, tears, dramatic exits. Sometimes they came with one sentence spoken evenly in a room full of people who had underestimated you. Marcus recovered enough to sneer. "You're embarrassed, I get it. We'll discuss compensation privately." Natalie stared at him. Then she slowly removed her engagement ring. The diamond caught the boardroom lights and threw a hard white spark onto the table. For an instant, Adrian's mind moved backward again to a different table, a kitchen table, where her mother had removed her wedding ring and placed it beside overdue bills because selling it would keep the electricity on for another month. Her father had refused at first. Her mother had said, "Pride doesn't cook dinner, Daniel." Adrian never forgot the sound the ring made when it touched the wood. Natalie's ring made a similar sound now. Small. Final. She placed it in front of Marcus. "You can add this to whatever column you use for things you thought you owned." For once, Marcus had no immediate answer. Victoria did. You will regret humiliating this family. Natalie looked at her. No, I regret trying not to. Adrian turned another page in her folder. The final clause, she said, and the room shifted again. Those 3 words did what the presentation had not. They made Marcus return fully to his chair. He sat slowly. Victoria's eyes narrowed, calculating. Celeste looked from Marcus to Adrian to the directors, searching for the person most likely to save her. No one volunteered. Adrian placed a document at the center of the table. The enforcement clause allows Vale Capital Group, upon evidence of executive misconduct prior to transition, to suspend severance, freeze deferred compensation, claw back bonuses, remove advisory privileges, initiate civil recovery, and refer concealed violations to regulators. Marcus's throat moved. Victoria's hand went to her pearls. Additionally, Adrian continued, because Whitmore family representatives certified the accuracy of the due diligence disclosures, any intentional omission converts the family's golden parachute package into a restitution reserve. Hargrove closed his eyes briefly. He knew this part. He had read it 3 times before signing and still felt the ground tilt beneath him. Marcus whispered, "How much?" Adrian held his gaze. "All of it." Victoria stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "This is theft." "No," Adrian said, "this is consequence. You cannot take our family estate. I have no interest in your estate unless company funds were used to maintain it." The silence that followed answered too much. Miriam made a note. Victoria saw it and snapped, "That house is private property." Adrian's voice remained even. "Then the audit will confirm that." Marcus looked at his mother. For years he had believed Victoria knew every answer before a question was asked. He had watched senators lower their voices around her, bankers laugh too eagerly at her jokes, society women orbit her like anxious moons. But now she looked older, not frail, not weak, but exposed, like a portrait removed from perfect lighting. He remembered being 9 years old and watching her dismiss a gardener who asked for an advance to pay medical bills. The man had stood near the fountain, hat in hand, voice shaking. Victoria had said, "If we save everyone from their emergencies, Marcus, we become poor enough to have our own." The next day, she bought a French chandelier. Marcus had thought this was sophistication. Now he wondered how many emergencies had gathered outside their gates, waiting. Not out of remorse, only fear. Adrian saw the flicker in him and knew it for what it was. Men like Marcus often mistook panic for transformation. They confused the terror of losing comfort with the birth of conscience. Real remorse looked outward. Marcus was still looking at his own hands, checking what remained in them. Effective immediately, Adrian said, Marcus Whitmore is suspended from all executive duties pending investigation. Victoria Whitmore is removed from the advisory board. All family expense accounts are frozen. Corporate apartments, vehicles, and discretionary funds are recalled. Celeste made a tiny sound. Marcus turned toward her. Not now. She stared at him. My apartment. Adrian answered before he could. If it was paid for with company funds, yes. Celeste's lips parted. But where am I supposed to go? No one answered. Not even Marcus. That was the moment Celeste understood what Natalie had learned painfully over 2 years. Marcus protected people only when protection made him feel powerful. The moment they became expensive, inconvenient, or embarrassing, he treated them like faulty assets. Celeste stepped away from him. The movement was small, but Marcus saw it. Rage flashed across his face. You're abandoning me too. Celeste looked almost offended. You said this company was yours. It is mine. Adrian corrected him, was. The word was quiet. That made it merciless. Victoria gathered herself. She had survived rooms full of men who underestimated her, social rivals who envied her, journalists who questioned her charity accounts, and a husband who once tried to give the company presidency to a professional CEO instead of their son. She had beaten them all through pressure, charm, information, or patience. She would not be beaten by this woman in a plain suit. Not publicly. She lifted her chin. Ms. Vale, you are obviously intelligent. Perhaps we began poorly. Adrian said nothing. Victoria softened her tone, the way she did when persuading donors to write checks. Marcus can be impulsive. His announcement was unfortunate, but personal matters should not interfere with corporate continuity. Surely we can reach an arrangement that preserves stability. Marcus looked relieved. There she was. His mother had returned. Victoria continued, you need the Whitmore name. Customers trust it. Investors know it. Employees may resent change if you appear hostile to the founding family. Adrian studied her. There it was, the old trick. Wrap self-preservation in concern for others. Call greed tradition. Call accountability instability. Call removal hostility. My father trusted the Whitmore name, Adrian said. Victoria blinked. A faint crease appeared between her brows. Adrian saw the moment recognition tried to surface, but failed. Of course, Victoria would not remember every small supplier she ruined. People like Daniel Vale had been line items, not names. Daniel Vale, Adrian said. Victoria's eyes sharpened. Not guilt. Memory. Marcus looked confused. Who? Adrian did not look at him. Vale Precision Components, 12-year supplier. Contract cancelled after delayed payments put the company under. Your legal department alleged defects that your internal quality reports disproved. Victoria's expression hardened, but something behind it shifted. You were the daughter, she said. Marcus glanced from his mother to Adrian. A child again outside a conversation adults understood. Adrian nodded once. I was. Victoria recovered quickly. Then this is personal. It became personal when your son made it clear nothing had changed. Victoria seized on that, so you admit bias. Adrian almost smiled. I admit memory. Bias would have been letting this company collapse because of what your family did to mine. Instead, I am saving it from you. Elaine Porter looked up then, unable to hide admiration. Hargrove sat very still. Natalie watched Adrian with new understanding. She saw, beneath the CEO's composure, not bitterness, but discipline sharpened by old pain. Adrian had not come swinging a sword. She had come carrying contracts, audits, payroll protections, and the kind of patience that frightened people who lived by impulse. Marcus scoffed, desperate to regain footing. So this is revenge dressed up as business. Adrian turned to him. No, Marcus. Revenge would be easy. Business is what requires restraint. He hated the way she said his name. Not Mr. Whitmore, not Sir Marcus. Reduced to himself. Miriam distributed another set of documents. These are the separation and cooperation agreements, Adrian said. You will both have independent counsel review them. If signed, Vale Capital will limit civil recovery to documented improper transfers, cooperate with regulators as legally required, and avoid public commentary beyond necessary transition statements. Victoria understood faster than Marcus. And if we don't sign? Adrian folded her hands. Then the full audit proceeds without negotiated limits, and every finding becomes available for creditor review, shareholder litigation, and regulatory referral. Marcus leaned forward. You're threatening us. I am giving you choices. You may find the experience unfamiliar. Celeste lowered herself into a chair that was not hers. Natalie almost laughed again, but this time the sound would have carried something like release. Victoria reached for the agreement. Her eyes scanned quickly, greedily, looking for weakness. Adrian had seen that look before. Lawyers often called it review. Predators called it hunting. Victoria found the paragraph near the bottom. Her face changed. What is this? Marcus snatched a copy. Adrian waited. He read aloud under his breath, then stopped. The room seemed to lean toward him. Adrian spoke. As part of any negotiated resolution, you will issue written apologies to employees affected by the concealed fund diversions, to the vendors whose payments were delayed, while executive benefits were maintained, and to Natalie Reed for the deliberate public humiliation conducted in this boardroom. Natalie stiffened. Marcus exploded, absolutely not. Victoria's voice turned icy. You cannot compel personal apology. No, Adrian said, I can make it a condition of mercy. There it was. The word that had hovered over the room since the beginning. Mercy. Marcus's face twisted, as if the word tasted poisonous. His mother looked at him sharply, warning him to control himself, but Marcus had never been taught control. He had been taught victory. He had been taught applause. He had been taught that silence meant submission and money meant absolution. Now silence meant judgment. Money meant evidence. And applause had died in his mother's hands. I will not apologize to her, Marcus said, pointing at Natalie without looking at her. She benefited from this family for 2 years. Natalie's face went still. Adrian's eyes cooled. The directors looked away, but not out of embarrassment for Natalie. This time, they looked away from Marcus, as if his ugliness had become too plain to watch. Natalie walked around the table. Marcus straightened, perhaps expecting tears, perhaps expecting pleading, perhaps expecting one more attempt to salvage whatever fantasy she had once built around him. Instead, Natalie picked up the ring and dropped it into Celeste's open handbag. Celeste jolted. Natalie said, You admired the position so much, keep the symbol. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Marcus shouted after her, Natalie. She stopped but did not turn. For one breath, the room waited. Marcus could have apologized then, not because of the clause, not because of Adrian, not because the board watched him. He could have reached for the smallest remaining piece of decency and spoken like a human being. But Marcus Whitmore had been trained too well. You signed a confidentiality agreement, he said. Natalie turned. And Adrian knew, before she spoke, that whatever pity Natalie had left was gone. Natalie looked at him as one might look at a beautiful house after discovering the foundation had rotted through. So did you, she said. Apparently yours was more expensive. She left the boardroom. The door closed softly behind her. No slam. No spectacle. Just an ending. Adrian turned back to Marcus. You were saying. He sank into his chair. Outside the boardroom, Natalie paused in the corridor. The receptionist, a young man named Theo, pretended not to have heard anything, though his eyes were damp with sympathy. Natalie gave him a small nod. Around her, Whitmore Tower hummed with ordinary corporate life, phones ringing, printers clicking, assistants moving briskly with tablets and coffee cups. For years, Natalie had thought towers like this were built from ambition. Now she understood they were built from stories people agreed not to tell. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and saw her reflection in the polished doors. She looked pale, yes, humiliated perhaps, but not destroyed. Behind her reflection, she saw Adrian's assistant, Lorraine Price, standing near the corner. Lorraine was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, and the kind of calm that came from surviving more powerful fools than anyone knew. She had worked for Whitmore Industries 22 years before joining Vale Capital quietly 6 months earlier as part of the transition team. Natalie had always liked her. Ms. Reed, Lorraine said gently. Natalie looked at her. Lorraine held out an envelope. Ms. Vale asked me to give you this only if you chose to leave before the meeting ended. Natalie hesitated, then took it. Inside was a short handwritten note. Natalie. None of what happened in that room was your shame. If you want a clean exit, my legal team will help you secure it. If you want work, call me Monday. If you want silence, you owe no one an explanation. IV. Natalie read it twice. For the first time that morning, her eyes filled with tears, not because Marcus had betrayed her. Strangely, that pain already felt old. She cried because someone had seen the humiliation coming and prepared dignity for her in advance. The elevator opened. Natalie stepped inside. Back in the boardroom, the final negotiation began not with shouting, but with numbers. That frightened Marcus more. Shouting he understood. Shouting could be matched, escalated, twisted into claims of disrespect. Numbers did not care whether he felt insulted. Miriam reviewed the clawback amounts, executive bonuses, personal travel, advisory fees, improper vendor transfers, relocation accounts, charitable misuse, and discretionary withdrawals requiring verification. Every category sounded clinical. Every figure sounded like a door closing. Victoria interrupted twice. Adrian corrected her twice. Marcus interrupted 6 times. Adrian ignored him 5 times. The 6th time he said, "Do you have any idea who my friends are?" Adrian looked up. "I know who answered their phones last night." That silenced him. Another flashback rose in Marcus's mind, unwanted. He was 27, newly appointed Chief Strategy Officer, though he had no strategy beyond confidence. His father, Edmund, was still alive then, already ill but clear-eyed. They had stood in this very boardroom after Marcus mocked a plant manager's accent during a video call. Edmund had dismissed everyone else, then told him, "A man who humiliates people in public is usually trying to hide private incompetence." Marcus had laughed. His father had not. "You think cruelty looks like control," Edmund said. "It looks like fear to anyone wiser than you." Marcus had repeated the conversation to Victoria that night, expecting comfort. She told him his father had grown sentimental and weak. 6 months later, Edmund was gone. Victoria ensured Marcus took control before the board could bring in an outside CEO. Marcus had not thought about his father's warning in years. Now, across the table, Adrian Vale looked at him as though she had heard it too. Victoria requested a recess to call counsel. Adrian granted 10 minutes. No one left the room. That was deliberate. The agreement sat in front of the Whitmores like sealed verdicts. The screen remained lit behind them. The founder's portrait stared over Marcus's shoulder. The brass motto gleamed under the lights, "We preserve what is ours." Adrian let the silence work. People often confessed into silence because they could not bear meeting themselves there. Celeste broke first. "I didn't know about most of this," she said. Marcus glared at her. "Don't." She turned on him. "You told me the board approved everything." "The board approves what I tell them to approve." Elaine Porter's eyebrows lifted. Miriam wrote another note. Marcus realized too late what he had said. Victoria closed her eyes. Adrian leaned back slightly. "Thank you for clarifying your understanding of governance." Celeste looked near tears now, but Adrian did not soften. Sympathy was not the same as absolution. Celeste had enjoyed humiliating Natalie. She had walked into the boardroom ready to accept another woman's public destruction as part of her own promotion. But Celeste had also just discovered that Marcus had used her name, her family, and her ambition as channels for misconduct that could follow her for years. Consequences, Adrian knew, had different shapes for different people. Victoria's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen, answered, listened, then said very little. Her attorney was good enough to understand bad facts quickly. When she ended the call, her expression had changed. Marcus leaned toward her. "Mother." She did not answer immediately. That frightened him more than anything else that morning. Victoria looked at Adrian. "If we sign, you limit the public statement. Yes. No mention of regulatory referrals. Not unless required. No language implying guilt. The statement will say you are stepping down to allow new leadership during restructuring. Marcus stared at her. You're considering this. Victoria's jaw tightened. I am considering survival. He recoiled as if betrayed. There had been many moments in Marcus's life when Victoria had chosen him over ethics, over employees, over creditors, over truth. He had mistaken those choices for love. Now he saw the boundary. Victoria would protect him until protecting him threatened Victoria. Adrian had known. The mother who applauded cruelty would not sacrifice herself for the cruel son once the applause stopped. Marcus's voice dropped. You told me Whitmores never retreat. Victoria did not look at him. Whitmores do not drown for theatrics. He stood again, knocking his chair backward. This is because of her, he pointed at Adrian, because some supplier's daughter held a grudge for 20 years. Adrian's expression did not change, but inside, something old and tender stirred. Her father had died before seeing Vale Capital listed among the most influential firms in the country. He died in a modest apartment, proud but tired, still keeping a small tin box of machine screws from the workshop he lost. On difficult nights, Adrian would open that box and hold one screw in her palm, remembering how he taught her that tiny things held enormous structures together. Precision matters, he used to say. One flawed piece, placed where it doesn't belong, can bring down the whole machine. Marcus was a flawed piece. Victoria had installed him at the center. Now the machine was failing. No, Adrian said, this is because you were given a company and treated it like an audience. The words went through him cleanly. For a moment, Marcus looked almost young. Then the rage returned. I will fight this. You may. I will sue. You can. I will destroy your reputation. Adrian tilted her head slightly. With what credibility? He had no answer. Miriam placed a pen beside the agreements. Victoria stared at it. A pen had built the Whitmore empire as much as factories had. Contracts signed over lunch, deals closed in private clubs, settlements sealed before stories reached newspapers. Victoria had spent her life believing the person who controlled the pen controlled the ending. Now the pen lay closer to her than to Adrian. Yet it did not feel like power. It felt like surrender. Marcus lowered his voice. Mother, don't. Victoria looked at him then, and for the first time that day, her face showed something like grief, not regret, not moral awakening, grief for lost status, lost rooms, lost deference, lost certainty that the world would bend. You should have married Natalie quietly, she said. Marcus stared at her. Even now, that was her lesson. Not be faithful, not be kind, not be honest. Be discreet. Adrian heard it too, and the last trace of hesitation left her. Victoria picked up the pen. Wait, Marcus said. She signed. The room seemed to exhale. Then she pushed the agreement toward Marcus. He looked down at her signature as though it were a wound. I'm not signing that apology. Victoria's voice became steel. You will sign everything. You can't make me. She leaned closer. Marcus, if the full audit proceeds without limits, they will not only take the company money, they will find the estate renovations, the Cayman transfers, and the foundation reimbursements. Miriam stopped writing. Adrian's eyes sharpened. Victoria froze. She had said too much. Marcus looked horrified. Not because of the misconduct. Because she had named it aloud. Adrian turned slowly to Miriam. Please note Mrs. Whitmore's statement. Victoria's composure cracked. That was a privileged family conversation. No, Miriam said quietly. That was a disclosure made in the presence of company counsel, directors, and the acquiring CEO. Hargrove rubbed a hand over his face. Elaine Porter whispered, "My God." For the first time, Victoria Whitmore looked truly cornered. The final clause had been powerful before. Now it had teeth. Marcus sat down heavily. Adrian gave him the pen. He did not take it. Seconds passed. Then a minute. No one rescued him. No one applauded. No one adjusted. At last Marcus reached for the pen. His hand shook with contained fury. He signed the separation agreement. He signed the cooperation acknowledgement. He signed the compensation freeze. He signed the company property return order. Then he reached the apology condition. He stopped. "I can't," he whispered. Victoria snapped, "You can." He looked at Adrian, and there it was, the beginning of begging, not on his knees, not yet in words, but in the eyes, the silent request every fallen tyrant makes when he discovers the rules apply to him. "Remove the apology," he said, "please." The word startled the room. "Please." It sounded foreign in his mouth. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. She thought of her father in the rain, her mother's ring on the kitchen table, Sophia Bell disappearing from the executive floor, the Ohio plant workers whose safety complaints were filed under morale noise, Natalie standing straight while her private heartbreak became a corporate spectacle. She thought of all the people who had been forced to plead for paychecks, references, dignity, extensions, explanations. Marcus wanted mercy without humility. That was the one thing Adrian would not buy, sell, or negotiate. "No," she said. His face twisted. "Adrian." "Ms. Vale." He swallowed. "Ms. Vale," he said, each syllable burning him, "I am asking you to reconsider." Victoria added quickly, "We are asking." There it was. Them. Begging. Adrian did not enjoy it as much as she once imagined she might. Years ago, when she was young and angry, she had pictured a moment like this with satisfaction. She imagined triumph would feel hot, bright, almost joyful. Instead, it felt quiet, heavy, necessary. There was no sweetness in watching people beg when so much damage had already been done. There was only responsibility. She leaned forward. "I will reconsider one thing." Marcus looked up. Victoria went still. Adrian said, "If the employee restitution reserve is funded immediately from the frozen executive accounts, I will allow the personal apology to Natalie to remain private unless she chooses otherwise." Marcus's relief was visible. Victoria's was sharper, more controlled. But Adrian continued, "The employee apology will be public inside the company. Every worker laid off under false necessity, every vendor delayed while personal expenses were paid, every department told to sacrifice while executives concealed benefits. They will hear directly that leadership failed them." Victoria's lips thinned. Marcus whispered, "That will destroy me." Adrian's voice was steady. "No, it will introduce you." He stared at her. The sentence struck deeper than accusation because it was not emotional. It was definition. Victoria signed the amendment first. Marcus followed. When the last signature dried, Adrian stood. The meeting was not over, but the dynasty was. She turned to Hargrove. "Notify department heads that payroll is secured through the transition. Release the vendor payment schedule by close of business. Reinstate the Ohio Safety Review. Freeze all non-essential executive spending. I want employee briefings prepared within 48 hours. Hargrove nodded, and for the first time in months, his face showed something like relief. Elaine Porter asked, "And interim leadership?" Adrian looked around the table. Not at the portraits. Not at the motto. At the people who had finally chosen the company over the family. "Until a permanent CEO is appointed, I will serve as executive chair through the restructuring. Ms. Porter will lead the audit committee. Mr. Hargrove will oversee operational continuity. Ms. Ellis will coordinate with outside counsel. Then Adrian paused. And find Natalie Reed. Marcus's head snapped up. Why? Adrian looked at him, because unlike you, she understands stakeholder trust. Victoria gave a bitter laugh. You would hire the woman my son discarded. Adrian's gaze moved to her. No, Mrs. Whitmore, I would hire the woman your son underestimated. No one spoke after that. Security arrived 5 minutes later. Not dramatically, not with force. 2 calm professionals in dark suits entered with inventory forms and temporary access badges. Marcus was asked to surrender his executive keycard, company phone, and laptop. Each item placed on the table sounded like another nail sealing a door. The phone was hardest. Not because Marcus valued the device, but because it contained the illusion of reach, contacts, messages, invitations, private lines to men who answered quickly because he was useful. Without it, he looked strangely ordinary. Victoria surrendered her advisory badge with a glare that promised future war. Adrian did not doubt she would try. People like Victoria did not vanish after defeat. They adapted, schemed, called old favors, and told themselves the world had become vulgar because it no longer obeyed them. But Adrian had dealt with worse than Victoria Whitmore. Not louder, not richer, worse. As Marcus walked toward the door, he stopped beside Adrian. His voice was low enough that only she could hear. My family made this city. Adrian looked at him. Then perhaps the city deserves an apology too. He left. Victoria followed. Celeste hesitated. For 1 second, she seemed about to say something to Adrian, maybe to explain, maybe to plead, maybe to reposition herself as another victim of Marcus Whitmore's lies. Adrian spoke before she could begin. Return anything purchased with company funds, cooperate fully, get independent counsel, and never again confuse being chosen with being safe. Celeste's eyes filled. She nodded once and left without Marcus. The boardroom door closed. The room remained full, yet somehow lighter. Adrian turned toward the windows. The city beyond the glass had not changed. Cars moved. Sunlight struck rooftops. People carried coffee, argued into phones, waited at crosswalks, lived lives untouched by what had just happened high above them. But somewhere below, thousands of employees would soon learn their paychecks were safe. Vendors would receive calls they had stopped expecting. An old company would survive, not because of its name, but despite it. Adrian walked to the founder's portrait. Conrad Whitmore's painted eyes stared past her. She reached up and touched the cracked brass motto beneath it. We preserve what is ours. Take it down, she said. Hargrove blinked. The motto. The portraits can go to archives. The motto goes nowhere public. Elaine nodded slowly. What replaces it? Adrian thought of her father's workshop, the smell of metal and oil, his hands guiding hers as she learned how tiny components fit into larger machines, her mother laughing when the first invoice of Adrian's new company cleared, Natalie's ring striking the table, Marcus asking for mercy only after exhausting arrogance. Then she looked back at the board. Build what deserves to last. No one applauded. That pleased her. Some moments did not need applause. They needed work. 2 days later, every employee of Whitmore Industries received a message from the new executive chair. It was direct, brief, and unlike any communication the company had sent in years. It admitted leadership failure. It announced secured payroll. It outlined vendor repayment. It promised an independent reporting channel for ethical concerns. It named no gossip, offered no false optimism, and did not use the word family once. At 4:00 p.m. that same day, Marcus Whitmore's apology appeared on the internal company portal. Employees across factories, warehouses, offices, and regional branches opened it with disbelief. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. Some cried quietly at their desks because, For the first time, someone at the top had admitted what workers at the bottom had known all along. The apology was stiff. Legal had clearly reviewed it. Marcus had not become humble overnight, but the words were there. He acknowledged that executive decisions had harmed employees and vendors. He acknowledged that personal conduct had damaged trust. He acknowledged that leadership was not entitlement. Adrian read it once and closed her laptop. Across from her, in a temporary office overlooking the restructuring floor, Natalie Reed sat with a cup of untouched tea. She had accepted a consulting role for 90 days. Not because she needed rescue, she told Adrian carefully, but because she wanted to help stabilize relationships with donors, vendors, and community partners before deciding what came next. Adrian believed her. Natalie looked toward the city. Did he write my apology? Yes. Did you read it? No. Natalie turned, surprised. Adrian said, "It belongs to you." Natalie was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if I want to read it." "Then don't. That's simple." "Not simple, yours." Natalie nodded slowly. On Adrian's desk sat the small tin box of machine screws her father had kept. She had brought it that morning without fully knowing why. Perhaps because endings and beginnings often wore the same coat. Perhaps because she wanted him there when the Whitmore name finally stopped being a weapon. Natalie noticed the box. "What's that?" Adrian opened it. Inside, the screws gleamed dully, ordinary and precious. "My father used to say tiny things hold enormous structures together." Natalie smiled faintly. "Sounds like he was right." Adrian looked through the glass wall at the employees moving through the transition office, analysts, legal staff, HR leads, operations managers, people with rolled-up sleeves and tired faces. No portraits watched over them. No pearls applauded them. No heir stood at the head of the table demanding praise for damage. "Yes," Adrian said, "he was." That evening, Victoria Whitmore sat in the family estate. Beneath a chandelier purchased the week Daniel Vale's workshop closed. For the first time in decades, the house felt too large. Marcus stood near the fireplace, reading articles on a personal tablet. The public statement had been restrained, but business circles understood enough. Invitations were already being withdrawn. Calls were not being returned. Men who had laughed at his jokes now sent assistants to say they were unavailable. Celeste had not answered his messages. Natalie had blocked him. His mother had spent the afternoon with attorneys. "She planned this for years," Marcus said bitterly. Victoria stared at the chandelier. "No, we allowed this for years." He looked at her sharply. She did not explain. It was not repentance. Victoria Whitmore was not suddenly remade by defeat, but somewhere beneath her pride, beneath the polished habits of domination, she understood something Marcus did not yet have the courage to face. Adrian Vale had not destroyed them. She had arrived after they had already done that work themselves. Weeks passed. The Whitmore name came down from the tower in stages. First from the executive floor, then from the lobby wall, then from the employee handbook. The company was renamed Valeworks Industrial, a choice that made some branding consultants wince and employees unexpectedly proud. It sounded less like a dynasty and more like a promise. Adrian did not pretend restructuring was painless. Some divisions had to merge. Some contracts had to be renegotiated. Some executives who had hidden behind Marcus were removed. But for every hard decision, there was a reason given plainly. The company began to breathe again. At the Ohio plant, the safety review led to long-delayed repairs. In procurement, vendor payments went out with apology letters. In finance, the accountant Marcus had fired received an offer to return as compliance director. Sophia Bell declined to come back, but sent a two-word message to Adrian through counsel. "Thank you." Adrian printed it and placed it in the top drawer of her desk beside her father's tin box. Not every victory needed to be displayed. 3 months after the boardroom meeting, Adrian held a company-wide town hall in the same auditorium where Marcus had once announced layoffs beneath banners about resilience. This time, there were no banners, no dramatic lighting, no family crest. Just employees. Natalie stood near the back, now officially head of stakeholder relations. She had read Marcus's private apology eventually. It had not healed her, exactly, but it had confirmed something important. She no longer needed him to understand the damage in order for her to move beyond it. Adrian stepped onto the stage. For a moment she saw her father in the front row, not literally, not as a ghost, but as memory so vivid it felt present. Daniel Vale in his worn suit, her mother beside him, hands folded over a purse containing bills they could not pay, the rain on the pavement, Marcus's youthful smirk, Victoria's cold dismissal. Then the image faded. Before her sat the people the Whitmores had called replaceable. Adrian adjusted the microphone. "I was once told small people should know better than to depend on giants," she began. The room went still. "My father was told that by someone who believed power was the same as worth. For a long time, I thought success meant becoming powerful enough to make people like that afraid." She paused. "In some ways, maybe I did." A few quiet laughs moved through the room. But fear is not a foundation, neither is entitlement, neither is tradition without accountability. This company survived because people without portraits on the wall kept showing up, solving problems, protecting one another, and doing the work leadership failed to honor. Natalie watched employees lean forward. Adrian continued, "So here is what changes: no more dynasties, no more hidden accounts, no more treating silence as loyalty, no more confusing cruelty with strength." The room remained silent, but it was not the suffocating silence of the boardroom. This silence was attention, cautious, wounded, hopeful attention. "From now on," Adrian said, "we build what deserves to last." This time, people did applaud. Not because they were afraid. Not because someone's mother began it. Because they chose to. And in her office later, after the crowd dispersed, and the first difficult work of rebuilding resumed, Adrian stood alone at the window overlooking the city Marcus once claimed his family had made. The sunset turned the glass towers gold. On her desk, the tin box sat open. She took one small screw into her palm and closed her fingers around it. For years, she had carried the memory of humiliation like a blade. She had sharpened herself against it, worked through nights because of it, entered rooms ready to prove that no one would ever again mistake her silence for weakness. But standing there, with Whitmore gone from the building and thousands of workers still employed, Adrian understood something her father had tried to teach her before grief made her too angry to hear it. The point was never to make cruel people beg. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they had to. But the point was to stop building worlds where cruelty could inherit the keys. Behind her, a knock sounded. Natalie opened the door slightly. "The vendor council is ready." Adrian placed the screw back in the box and closed the lid. "Let's go," she said. Together, they walked out of the office and into the corridor where the portraits had been removed. Pale rectangles remained on the walls, outlines of old power not yet covered by new paint. Natalie glanced at them, looked strange without them. "For now," Adrian said. "What will go there?" Adrian looked down the hallway. Employees moved past with files, tablets, tool bags, coffee cups, and the weary focus of people rebuilding something that had almost been lost. She smiled faintly. "Names," she said, "not of owners, of builders." And this time, when the boardroom doors opened, no one inside was waiting to be saved by a Whitmore. They were already saving themselves.